Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Great, great. So I'm already started recording, so we'll get right into it, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk to Thomas. I was going to say I'm going to talk to Thomas Taylor, risen from the grave. No, I'm going to talk to Thomas James about Thomas Taylor, whom I don't really know. I mean, I know who he is and what he's done, but I haven't actually read him. And I suspect you know a great deal more. So I'm hoping to that you can enlighten us on the details of this man, who's obviously a great man from what I have read.
Yeah.
Sort of a late Enlightenment era, or like 18th into 19th century Neoplatonist who translated a lot of the greats. And yeah, why don't you run us down a bit of Thomas Taylor?
Yeah. So he's a fascinating figure. He was an unapologetic Platonist, and he embraced Platonism to its fullest extent, gods and all. And for those of us who identify as Platonists today and partake in the cults of the gods, he's really an unsung hero because through his translations, his commentaries, his essays, he connected contemporaries and future generations with this philosophic and theological tradition in ways that, for centuries prior, were not possible.
Right, right. And yes, he was obviously very courageous about his. I mean, he was outspoken against criticizing Christianity when it was very dangerous to do so, I suppose. And he somehow got
Yeah.
away with it. I guess I suppose he had his connections or something. He seemed to have gotten away with a good bit. He's like Platon that way. He's sort of like incredibly scandalous, outrageous character who somehow gets away with it.
Yeah, in fact, a number of literary journals would refer to him as the Platon of our time, or the pagan high priest of England. Yeah, and this was a time when one could still be prosecuted under blasphemy laws in England. So how he got away with this is, it still perplexes me. But
Well, I suspect he must have had connections. He must have. I mean, he was born into wealth, was he? Or
no, he's actually from very humble means. His
oh,
father, I think, was a corset maker. He
okay,
never went to Oxford or Cambridge. He was an autodidact. He taught himself Greek and Latin.
wow,
And he was actually not very well liked by
okay.
the establishment in England. He was widely panned in literary reviews and in classical journals.
Right, right, yeah. So what do you think was his? I mean, was he really widely panned, and even thereafter, and it's only like he's having a resurgence now in hindsight, being looked on favorably. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, but even at his time, he did have a circle of admirers.
Yeah,
There was the Marquis de Valady, who was a French aristocrat who called himself a Pythagorean, and he considered himself a disciple of Taylor. But even in the United States in the early 19th century, um, many of these transcendentalists like Emerson and Bronson Alcott, they they might Plato. They read his translations. They revisited them quite frequently,
right,
and it was a persistent influence on transcendentalism in the United States.
right,
And the Theosophists at the end of the 19th century received Taylor very well. I mean, that was their main exposure to Platonism, was through his translations.
right, right. The Transcendentalists. I'm not super familiar with those. What do you know about them? Just for other people like me who don't know it that
Yeah,
well.
so they were this philosophical, quasi-spiritual movement in the beginning of the 19th century in the United States. It was concentrated largely in New England and Concord, um, and it's kind of a post-Kantian movement in a way. They're trying to get back into contact with reality. They see society and the vicissitudes of life as these titanic forces that are tearing apart at our wholeness, our unity. And they see nature as the most complete, comprehensive, and ultimate whole. And so to recapture our integrity, we need to reacquaint ourselves with nature, with this whole, this universal being, as Emerson calls it, um, and find ourselves in solitude within it. And through that, we can recapture our individuality, our wholeness, and realize our unity with nature and with God, which is this kind of spirit within nature. So in this, you can kind of see the echoes of Plotinus with, the soul coming alone unto itself, as well as the influence of Plato in this idea that, material reality is not the only reality, that there is an underlying incorporeal order to it.
Right. I mean, that does sound like I would agree with them about a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
So how can I say, what was the state of the knowledge of Plato and Aristotle and before he did his translations? What was the state of knowledge publicly? Do you know? What's it like? Was it just like for, purely for Latin priests to know about, or?
Yeah, largely. Well, those who studied Plato or Aristotle with any depth or seriousness would have been studying divinity. But most educated, illiterate men at this time would have had a classical education. And so they would have read excerpts of Plato or Aristotle to exercise their linguistic faculties. So most people had some minimal exposure, but at this time, most of the works of Plato and Aristotle and other Platonists were not available in English. And so Taylor's really the first one to translate all of these in English and make them available.
Right. It's amazing that it took so long, really, isn't it? I guess, although, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So he influenced all those other groups. So these Transcendentalists and the Madame Blavatsky and all those were directly his children and grandchildren, let's say, in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, what is it? You're a big fan of his. You read his translations, I take it. Did you read all his translations? Or?
Not all of them. There's quite a lot out there, but
is there? Okay, yeah. So what was it about him that you wanted to discuss, that he was one of your favorites?
Well, I think he's one of the few people to actually read, understand, and know Plato and the Platonic tradition in the way that many people centuries before him and after him failed.
Right.
For one, I mean, he recognized that there really is no distinction between the Platonists and the Neoplatonists, that they are in harmony with one another, that this is kind of a modern imposition on the past. And recent scholarship has more or less vindicated Taylor on this. The research and scholarship of the Tübingen School has, in a reconstruction of Plato's unwritten doctrines and metaphysics, have shown that the Neoplatonists are more or less in harmony with Plato. Other ways that Taylor, I think, is important is that he read the Platonist as a Platonist. He took seriously their hermeneutics. He read the dialogues and the commentaries on their terms, and he didn't try to impose any kind of modern or historiographic analysis on this. And so what we have is really an understanding of the Platonic tradition on its own terms, which is something we really didn't have too much before. The reception of Plato in the West was largely through Christianity and trying to make Platonism conformable to Christian theology. And then towards the end of the 18th century, largely on the continent, there was a movement to make Plato kind of the godfather precursor to modern rationalist philosophy. Friedrich Schleiermacher was a notable figure in this. And then even into the 20th century, you had those like Leo Strauss who tried to characterize Platonic philosophy as radically atheist. Taylor saw all through this. He realized that Plato's philosophy is dependent upon his theology. They cannot be separated. And that it's a fundamentally, how should I say, religious or spiritual philosophy. It's not just this logic chopping. It's not just discursive analysis. Its fundamental concern is to contemplate true being and to attain a likeness to God.
Yeah, that's why I kind of think of him and even refer to him as a prophet, really. I mean, is that, is that, I don't know why more people don't say that, because that's how I consider him. And yes, they do try it. I remember when I first read my first translation of first thing I read the Republic, a modern translation, but I just remember the forword, the preface was all just sort of like making the excuses for the religious bits, kind of saying, this is just rationalist philosophy. You take the good bit out of it, but ignore when he starts talking about sounds like a spiritualist or anything like that. And I was like, okay, but typical kind of, we're good, like some genius who wrote a preface knows better than Plato and is going to tell you before you read the book what you should really like or not like about it. So you can tell that was going on for sure. But yeah, everyone.
Yeah, building on that, he defended the inherent polytheism in the Platonic tradition. As I was saying, a lot of people read Plato as a monotheist, a proto-monotheist, or even an atheist. Taylor highlighted that he's talking about gods here, and the gods for Plato and the Platonists, they're real. They are not just mere differentiations of one god. They have their own subsistence. And this is something that was kind of scandalous in England at the time among classicists and literary critics.
To say it was to say that it wasn't just to say that it was real and that he was it was religiously real. Let's say. Right.
Absolutely.
So it really the real hype. When it culminates in the story of in the Republic, in that bit, that's the bit where everything that comes before culminates in a religious message, which involves reincarnation and these kind of ancient beliefs. So was he was since I haven't read him, I can't say. So he was a true believer in the sense, like he adopted all that, and he was on board in belief wise. Yes, he was fully pagan, you would say.
Taylor.
Yeah.
Yes, as far as we know. Yeah.
As far as we know, yeah. So did he write apart from his translations? He wrote also just sort of his own philosophy, or because I don't even know. Sorry.
Not really. He's kind of within the late Platonic tradition of writing commentaries. So in a lot of his translations, he offers introductions, which function as kind of commentaries on the text, where he is interpreting them, performing exegesis on them. He did write more academic kind of essays, like his dissertation on the Eleusinian and Bacchic mysteries. But he's not presenting his own philosophy or theology here. He's really trying to explain this philosophy to a new audience.
He was like the first Manly Hall or something. Is that?
Yeah, you can say that.
In a way. So in his life then, so he didn't really get any apart from being sort of he didn't get thrown in jail. He didn't have any major scandals due to this. And in fact, he was somewhat celebrated, you could say. I read something about he only spoke in classical Greek to his wife or something like that.
Yeah, that's one of those apocryphal stories surrounding his life, that he only spoke Greek at home. There's also things like he led pagan processions through the city of London with his disciples, or that he had a temple inside his house. I don't know if these are true, but
yeah, it could be. It could very easily just be gossip and scandal.
Yeah, but I'd like to believe it's true.
Yeah. One would like to think that. Yeah. So how did he end up in the end of his life? Was there a culmination? Did he just kind of was everything? Was it all just kind of a normal life in the end, apart from this?
Yeah, pretty much.
I think he lived about 100, not 100 years, but he lived from, was it 1750 something to 18?
Yeah, 1758 to 1835.
All right.
Yeah, I think he died of a bladder infection or bladder cancer or something like that. Yeah, I don't want to say he died in obscurity, but he kind of, went out without a whimper.
So in your own version, so when you said earlier about Platonism, I always get confused whether to say Platonism or Neoplatonism. I sort of just choose to say one or the other, and I never thought there was much of a difference. You were saying there's people that are very much believe there's a huge difference and are very pedantic about that. Is that the case?
Yeah, it's not so much the case now. Scholarship, I think, has caught up with Taylor on this point. But through the 19th and 20th century, it was common to differentiate the late Platonists, as I like to call them, from Plato or the Old Academy, because they saw it as overly Oriental. There was a lot of Eastern influence. They saw it as irrational, as overly religious and ritualistic, because a lot of the late Platonists at this time expressed interest in theurgy. So they kind of, discounted this kind of Platonism as irrational, decadent, degenerate.
So he was a huge fan of Iamblichus, I think, was his favorite. Is that right? Taylor?
I wouldn't say it was his favorite, but he a lot of his attention was focused on the late Platonists, like Iamblichus, Proclus.
Yeah. Have you yourself read Iamblichus? I've read just bits. I keep meaning
on the mysteries.
Yeah. And how did you find it? What did you take from it?
Wow, where to begin with that?
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I think it's what he presents there is, I look as a hermeneutics of pagan cult. This idea that we engage in worship and devotion to the gods for our own salvation.
Right. I read there was some talk in there. He had some ideas about there being extrasolar deities outside of that we don't know about. Very Lovecraftian sounding. Did you come across any of that?
Well, that's something that's echoed by other Platonists as well, like Proclus, that there is an indeterminate number of deities out there. They're finite but indeterminate, and there's just some gods out there that we don't know about yet.
So you would have, and you yourself, just let me ask you personally as an aside. So you personally have a belief in the gods as they would understand it, let's say, as Plato would understand it. Like say for myself, like, so when you hear things like that, like I myself think of them more as powers and currents in the world. Like, and when I hear things like that, it reminds me of, like, say, the Shinto, where they have like the kamis or whatever, and there's like, which are like basically spirits in the world that you have to show reverence for and leave them offerings. But they're just like, say, I'm sure Taylor would say, which Platonists would say, that God is actually unknowable and you can't even begin to fathom it. You can't name it or even properly think about it, or you can't begin to understand it. So it's just sort of something that you have to show reverence for, and sort of accept as, the prime mover and the powers, the different forces, the currents of power in the world are, you can, like, there's in Shinto, there's 8 million of these kamis, which are like spirits, for various spirits for everything, and they're all to do with nature. Yeah. So, and I don't know if they've literally like wrote a list of 8 million with names. I'm not sure about that, but that's kind of like that, where it's like not necessarily an eternal unending list of spirits and forces or gods, but that they are just like, I know people get very literal about categorizing and labeling things and saying what they are and saying what these forces are. So, but I would see it more in that sense, I think, where it doesn't even matter what you call them, because you can't really fathom them. You just kind of, when you get to a certain understanding in the world, you feel the certainty of these power currents. This is my term, but spirits in nature, forces, and that even then you might as well label them, whatever not whatever you want, but use the terms that resonate with you for what to call them. So you may totally disagree with that, but that's my own feeling about that. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So for me, my kind of go-to concept, how I would conceive the gods, is kind of the primordial and self-sufficient principles of being. That's how I look at them. And I don't see them so much as powers or energies. I do think they have powers and energies that work at different levels of being. But ultimately their existence is super essential. That is, beyond being. So
in that way, they're not really knowable, and it's just like whatever way we choose to recognize them. Would you agree with that? Is kind of abstract and kind of for our sake in some ways.
Well, it's not up to us how we recognize them. I mean, the gods reveal themselves and how they wish to be known.
Right. Yeah, I know it's hard to.
I mean, their ultimate existence is unknown to us because, again, it's beyond being, it's beyond any sort of discursive knowing. But as they are active at different levels of being, they disclose themselves in ways that are knowable to us.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Yeah. So, but it just reminds me when you were saying about Proclus and Iamblichus that the sheer amount of differentiation, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
differentiation. Can't even say this. Differentiation, whatever. The sheer number of these potential different ones, and I believe that used to be a source of mockery of the monotheist towards pagans, that there would be like a god for every, to be god of the house and a god for crossing the threshold. Right. But I mean, that still exists in these very ancient existing religions, and they seem to get by with it. They don't mind having so many, and it still has the meaning. And even then, in Christianity, you kind of try to find their way back to that. You pray to Saint Anthony when you lose your keys or whatever, and you kind of do all the same thing. You get back into that a little bit. They find ways, and many of them, anyways.
But as Proclus says, echoing Thales, everything is overflowing with gods.
Yeah. So if they're so in such multitude of powers, and there's different ones, would you say, like, let's just say personally, let's just postulate, because I don't know what you can postulate what you think Taylor would say if you want, but so would you say that you think there's new ones being created though, or as well?
No, I wouldn't say any are being created. Any god that exists has existed from the beginning.
Right.
Will exist until the end. I mean, they are eternal.
Right. Yeah. See, I see the possibility, I don't know, like that forces in the world that get labeled certain things can be thought of as sort of divinity in that way, as representing that power. Like I really do believe there is maybe like a mammon, say, representing that. You can call it that, and it can fall under him, or you might even say then the likes of the Christian God or Yahweh or whatever could be thought of as obviously it was a powerful force. You can think of him as good or bad or whatever, and maybe you can have another name for him as well. But all that force in the world that was acted could be thought of as part of some kind of deity at work. What would you think about that?
No, yeah, I would agree with that. I'm not sure where to take that, but yeah, I mean, there's the gods, their activities, their energies are at work in the world, constantly generating it. So, underlying so much of our experience of reality are, there's a revelation, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Well, to recognize that power and to say, especially when it seems chaotic and as a force to itself that steamrolls and catches on and creates more things, it just seems like it's beyond anything that humans can control or get around or understand. And nature kind of rolls over. It's part of nature as well, I guess. But maybe I'm digressing too much from Thomas Taylor. But I mean, it's always good to talk about these little ideas, I guess. But I mean, I think I read something of his. There was a bit of an excerpt of philosophy of his, but it was more like he was recounting. It was probably like a summary of his work on Plotinus or something like that. And he was definitely talking about how, but in this case, he was talking about the whole or the one, how it's completely unknowable in this sense, as beyond comprehension. Like, that's it, as far as does that kind of teaching or talk cross over into like Christian or other religious understanding, or do they react against that?
No, it's it is present in Christianity, and particularly it's prominent in the Orthodox Church. Pseudo Dionysius was heavily influenced by Proclus, and he also posits the unknowability and ultimate radical transcendence of God.
But much more than us, they would have a very certain specific idea about what God wants or doesn't want. They'd have their very specific rules about what is good or forbidden. You know what I mean? Like they do claim to understand it more, according to them. You know what I mean? Understand what God wants. So that in that sense, it feels like, they think they can communicate with with God more.
Yeah.
And even a lot of them talk, I have a personal relationship with God and all this kind of thing, like talking about their feelings and their daily events or something. But,
Mm-hmm.
so they probably are a little bit different in that way, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, their conception of God, I mean, ultimately, the essence of God in Christianity is unknowable, but he's still able to communicate himself in some way through his energies or through revelations. And of course, in Christianity, the ultimate revelation of God is in the incarnation of Jesus Christ. That's how we can know God, is because he took the form of man.
Right.
But this, of course, that's completely untenable to a Platonist.
Yeah.
There's none of that. There's no incarnation. There's no jumping the ontological chain of being.
Yeah. So there's a lot of very literal and rationalist, like literal. A lot of people argue. So let's say spend a lot of time arguing about what Plato really means, or what Proclus really means, or what is being said, or comparing it to other religions. And they get right down into the specifics and like quoting what he says this here, and this is that, and that is said there. And that's fine, but you do have to, we only have the writings and teachings to interpret ourselves and to work from. But I do think there's a lot of it is intuitive and instinctual in some ways. Like I think of the talk of the daemon, say, I always think of referring to my daemon, my instinct, and sort of following what I think is true or what is wanted of me, let's say. And I find it can be wise in many ways. But in that sense, that's why I keep referring back to how we interpret what these powers want, is that it's beyond knowing and like prescribing or categorizing in that way, and like knowing for certain, oh, you must do this is good and that's bad. It's more like I said, when you see in something more ancient and animistic, I keep thinking of Shinto because I've been reading about Shinto lately, but where they just kind of, there's morals and virtues of a kind involved, usually though they all are to do with nature and a worship of nature and things that are natural, which is very, I think, how Platonic is that? To be like, I don't know, nature worship is sort of in there, but not. What do you know? Do you know anything about that? Is nature worship in that?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, there is no worshiping of nature as such. It's a recognition of how the divine reveals itself through natural activities. But it's always the transcendent divine behind natural processes and activities and such. That is the object of worship.
So that's more when it got into Stoicism, maybe, when they were kind of everything that happens is good. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting confused. But they talk about what is natural. Plato does talk about what is natural being good in like a lot of ways. Like what is, you can't, everything that is within nature is part of the plan. Like, but
yeah, creation, the cosmos, it's fundamentally good.
Yeah. So what would Taylor, when he was doing the translations, so was he didn't start out Platonist. He did these translations and it converted him. Was he open about that? Is that what happened to him? Do you know?
Well, his interest in the classics and Plato started pretty young. He doesn't really give a autobiographical account of when his conversion moment happened. But it seems when he was pretty young, around probably 15 or 16 years of age, when he was studying Latin and Greek, that he became, I don't know if he was a committed Platonist at that time, but he was certainly immersing himself in that world.
Right.
No.
Yeah. And so like he would have been fairly, obviously, quite alone in this self-revelation that was happening to him. He was a real pioneer on his own, like he'd be quite on your own, although it would be, I suppose I felt that way when I read Plato. I was just like, when I started reading it, I was like 18 and I just was like, out of interest, I thought, oh, this would be neat. And nobody else around me had read it. So I was, it really struck me as a little adventure for me, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can try to explain it to people, but they just have to read it, I guess. It's the same for anybody. It's like you have to experience it yourself. But to work against the especially then the overarching, the Christianity would have been very strong and dangerous to go against in his day.
I guess another interesting thing about how Taylor read Plato, or rather read Aristotle, is that he saw Aristotle in harmony with Plato at a time when Aristotle was still very much conceived of as an anti-Platonist.
All right. Yeah, I always when I read Aristotle, I never really got that out of him so much myself. It's only other people I see that say this, and obviously I can see there's a certain point to what they say, but not.
Yeah,
it was more like always felt like he took what Plato did and just went off in his own little direction and wasn't necessarily anti.
Yeah.
So I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the Platonists who read Aristotle never considered him anti-Platonist either. They always saw him as in harmony with Plato, and that he was just beginning from a different starting point, where Plato began with the intelligible world. Aristotle started with the sensible.
Right. And did Taylor have any knowledge of, say, things like the Vedic religion? Did he make any reference to any of that kind of thing?
I'm not sure. I haven't really come across many references to that in his works.
Just wondering if he became interested in older religions through this, if he made any links like that. Because, yeah, I mean, I think what's her name, Blavatsky did. She took everything she could get her hands on, and just found her way. Mixed it together, I guess. I don't know. I haven't read her either specifically. I just read about her. But did you ever read her?
No, I've never had much interest in her or that kind of theosophical movement.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting just for its wackiness, and I mean, there were some cool things about it. I guess certainly had a lot of influence. You read from people at that time or shortly after, and they're like it always comes up.
Yeah.
So she had some kind of crazy influence.
A lot of people who were involved in the early years of the Theosophical Society in the United States, they were part of the kind of budding Platonist community that was taking forth here, especially along the Mississippi Valley, like Thomas More Johnson and Hiram Jones.
Right.
They were part of the Theosophical Society, and the co-editor of the Journal of the Platonist, what was his name? Dr. Alexander Wilder. He helped Blavatsky write Isis Unveiled.
You really know the history of this. You know the history of like Platonism in America, or did you study it, or is this out of personal interest that you know the interconnection? So,
yeah, I mean, it's out of personal interest largely.
Really, yeah.
I've undertaken to study it. Yeah.
Is there a lot? So, was there a large Platonist community in America that sort of, like you said, you mentioned these guys, and these guys weren't the Transcendentalists you were talking about earlier, right?
No, these are different. Yeah, these are they're. I'm not sure how you would describe them. For Thomas More Johnson, I think he was a Platonist first, but he definitely had interest in other things like theosophy. And the same with Hiram Jones and Dr. Alexander Wilder. The more theosophical minded, like Wilder, would have read Plato more. How Blavatsky did is this kind of perennial wisdom tradition, which I think Taylor would have been dismayed to know.
Dismayed, yeah, well, maybe. But so the Transcendentalists, apart from, so they sounded when you described what their belief was, it sounded pretty much like Neoplatonism, just like, except with an element of nature worship with added in more. Is that what they were?
I mean, there's definitely some similarities there. But they're still, in some ways, they're kind of reading the Platonist in a post-Kantian or neo-Kantian light, where where the mind is kind of withdrawn from reality, and it can only experience it through these innate categories in the mind.
Like the forms.
Yeah. So the forms for them, they're completely within the mind. They have no external reality or existence, as they did for Platonists.
Right. So how could they not say they don't have real existence, though? I wouldn't even understand how they could. when it's so obvious the form of a thing, if it's idealized outside of reality, you will have at least a real attempt at it. It seems weird. Anyways, is there other ones like that you know about? Other cults, American or post Thomas Taylor cults, maybe that? Because I've heard of the Transcendentalists per se, but I didn't really know too much about them. You might be the man to ask about this kind of.
Yeah, so there were the Transcendentalists in the early 19th century. Then in the 1880s, you had this, I don't want to say explosion, because it's a very small and niche community. But you have these budding Platonic study groups along the Mississippi Valley. They're mostly concentrated in Illinois and Missouri, though. But they're just, dedicated to the study and promotion of Platonism. These mostly die. They're short-lived. They mostly die out by the 1890s.
So it wasn't like a Christian Platonism. It was just straight up Platonism. Is that right?
I'm sure there were some Christian Platonists involved. I mean, it was ecumenical. It was the study of Platonism. Anyone who was interested in it could take part.
Right.
But a lot of these groups were founded by those interested in spiritualism, theosophy, the occult. So they kind of took that turn.
Right. So they were a bit fringe in that sense. They would have gone down that, got lumped in, like it or not, got lumped in with that crowd.
Yeah.
And right. So, but were they popular? Like, did they have a lot of followers or?
No, this is it's a very marginal movement.
Very marginal. Okay.
Yeah.
Because Plato was obviously in the end, Plato was taught very widely and very well known. Yeah. At least, I don't see any signs of him being, gone anytime soon. And people interpret it whatever way. It's really those writers of the prefaces when you pick up the book that really do the most harm, I guess. People then a lot of people do take that quite literally and only they read that first and they will actually follow those orders and just take certain things and just ignore the rest as a bit kooky or something, instead of just taking it as a whole and just being frank about the work. So to read, I bet you read Taylor's works, right? You read his Plato, Aristotle, and what else?
Iamblichus, and his translation of Proclus.
And Proclus. So you read Proclus too. That's another one. I understand Proclus. I've tried to read parts of it, but it seems quite mathematical.
He can be, yeah.
Was it hard, or what did you get out of Proclus? Can I ask?
He's a systematizer. He's also very granular. With Plotinus, you have the one, you have intellect, you have soul, nature. Proclus goes in there and he is adding granularity to all these levels. So intellect, you have the intelligible, intellectual, then the intellect, and so on and so forth. It can come off as a little abstruse. And I feel, I've been reading Proclus for a few years now, and it's in some sense I'm constantly learning from him. I feel like I've never really fully captured him. Every time I revisit him, I'm learning more.
So it's like a struggle. It's like an ongoing battle, but yet you're gaining from it.
Yeah,
you're gaining little victories in the war with Proclus as you go. Is that it? So I'd say the Taylor translations, being the year that they are from, are not as easy as a modern translation to read either.
No,
it's like when you read 19th century translation of the Iliad or something, and it can be very romantic and poetic and nice, but it does cloud it. They're over. It's true, and I'm obviously Mr. I'm not Mr. Trad or whatever, but I'm a big fan of I'm against, say, modernist ethos to art, and I don't mind a bit of flowery language and a bit of poetry, but they did kind of overdo it, especially in those translations, I think, because they obscure some of the really nice, clear, and a direct translation that we would get now, I think, has more impact, often more true and dramatic. I always find it a bit. I don't seek, let's say, a 19th century or earlier translation when I reach for a Neoplatonist or Homer or anything. It's difficult, and you know, they didn't always do a great job, let's say. So, but how, since I have not read Taylor, am I right that it would be a bit like that?
Oh, you were on the money with that one. One of the major complaints with Taylor's translations is that they are impenetrable. He and even at his time, among his contemporaries and his admirers, his translations were criticized as atrocious, impenetrable, obscure, and archaic.
So he was even worse. He was even worse than normal for that kind of thing. Is that it?
Yeah.
Like he had he like a simple 3 words in Latin. He'd expound into like 3 sentences of
Oh yeah.
giant words. Okay.
He has all the prolixity of Augustan prose with none of its charms.
So that sucks. So he wasn't actually in the end such a great writer. Is that the case?
Well, I mean, he would say that language is less important than the meaning and understanding that he conveys.
Right.
And to that end, I think his translations succeed. But again, the prose is difficult for modern readers.
Yeah, it's just much. There's an easy directness out of it, which is like the amazing. I mean, I can only imagine reading it in the original. I'm assuming you don't, or do you know Latin or Greek or?
No, unfortunately, although it is something
Yeah.
I'm studying.
Yeah, I'd say it's just amazing to read in the original language. That's what I would really like to do. Maybe one day when I have time, but, you know. So yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that Taylor succumbed to that sort of thing, which would be common of that people of that period. But yeah, what was I going to say? I had something else to ask you about him. Oh, I should write notes or something. I always forget my own thoughts, like in the middle of rambling. And so he did all right for himself, and he got away with it, and he was famous enough in his time. So his own life, it wasn't a story of persecution, and he was scandalous, but celebrated even in his own time.
Mm-hmm.
And he did, through his translations, affect a lot of people and change a lot of things, I guess, as did. So it wasn't to the level of the Renaissance, but it was sort of I mean, if you read, the 19th century was very, very infused with this kind of thinking, and they definitely had more respect than we do in many ways for classical thought. In that, if we had grown up in the 19th, 18th century, we would speak ancient Greek and Latin. Right. We would have been taught it, and we would have read and known many of these things like by rote, off by heart, and the myths and everything. Like you read a lot of British Empire era stuff, and they're actually even going around saying by Jove, by Jupiter. Like they're very Christian, but they're almost quasi-pagan in a lot of ways. They're influenced by that. They have that idea that they're like second coming of the Roman Empire, and they know the authors, they know the texts, they recite it more, at least. It's a weird mix where they're like very Christian and also very much into that, and shamelessly, in a way, I guess. And like, I don't know, how do you explain that in the modern context? That would be, and they were like Protestant Christians too, for the most part. So they didn't have that kind of modern day, let's say, evangelical idea that would be satanic, and you cannot say by Jove, you know what I mean? Which is a weird mix if you think of it. So how much of that do you think a lot of that was due to Taylor, or were they already on that path?
Oh, that was already common at that time.
In the 18th century.
Yeah. I mean, classicism, neoclassicism. I mean, any educated and literate person would have been educated in the classics and be able to read Greek, Latin, and Hebrew.
So why was he? For what reason was he the one to translate Plato and be famous for that?
Yeah, I guess he was just the first one with the patience and the will to do it.
Really?
Yeah.
So those however many. So those few centuries since Platon or whatever, in English we're talking about, obviously, yeah. So just in England, and which then became like meaning more, a greater part of the world than just England.
Mm-hmm.
So he was the one to popularize it. That's funny that they would go so long and just go like, oh, what a hassle.
Yeah.
This like thing that's richer and more important than just about anything else. That's funny.
But at that time, you could read Plato, Aristotle, or any of the classics in the original language. So it's like,
Oh,
why
I
go
see.
through the
Right.
effort of?
Oh, so he only, yeah, you're right, of course. So he only popularized it in the sense of the average person, you mean? Or not? No, because that would have been the average person too. In the sense of what then? So they would have actually been pretty popular. Is that the case?
How do you mean?
Well, like you say, so most people would have learned Latin and Greek and have read Plato in the original language.
Mm-hmm.
So what's so momentous about him then?
Well, especially towards in the 19th century, a classical education becomes less and less common.
Right.
So
Okay.
Taylor's translations become really the only way a lot of people, educated people now, have access to Plato and the Platonists and other Greek literature.
Right. Well, there's been a lot of translations in recent decades, that's for sure.
Yeah,
There's
definitely. That much is clear.
Well, what do you think of these guys that read the Republic, these modern guys, and say it's all like about communism and feminism and stuff? Like,
Yeah, they're wrong.
there's a lot of that. A fair bit. I mean, anyone they say the same about Nietzsche and stuff. Like, you can reinterpret these great thoughts, I guess, with a personal bias. I mean, he does say a few things that are kind of, you can see where they get it from, but it's more like these were kind of trivial. You didn't sense that was like the main part of what he was saying at all. It was like they picked up on something that they're looking for, and they can expand upon. Yeah. I mean, even if I think, like I do, that Plato was a prophet, I don't have some idea that I do believe he was also a man interpreting things for us. And if we believe that he's commenting on or trying to extrapolate from these unknowable, ununderstandable things, that it can only be, you have to forgive him for, saying things that are a bit abstract, or even not being 100% right in a certain, or not being able to understand it fully ourselves. Like I don't expect of him a kind of and it's the same for Christians with Jesus. That there's so many contradictory, crazy things he says that they just easily kind of, interpret it their own way.
Right.
Maybe that always has to be done to a certain degree. I don't know. Oh, is there something else you would? What apart from everything Platonic, what's your go-to, say, philosophy or inspiration? It's you.
Really, right now, I feel immersed in the Platonic tradition. For the past 10, 15 years, I've been kind of philosophically wandering and exploring different traditions and schools of thought. And I feel most settled in the Platonic tradition, most convinced in its fundamentals. But
Can I ask what led you there? What were you before that?
So before this, I was interested mostly in kind of Nietzschean and postmodern thought.
Really?
Yeah, surprisingly. But I feel I'm kind of grateful for that period in my life, because I feel it purified a lot of my preconceptions about the world, that prepared me for reading the Platonists.
Right. Well, Nietzsche is very important and great. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't. So when you say postmodern, then what are you thinking of?
So like Foucault,
Oh, really?
and the French, that kind of thing.
The French.
Yeah.
Was that at school that you read those, or out of interest? Can I ask?
Mostly out of interest. Yeah.
Really? So you just missed it? That's all out of interest for you? Oh, it was the same for me. I didn't study philosophy at school. Not that that would be, I'm sure that would be a tremendous waste of money. But so you have a certain respect for the Foucault, do you? Do you like the Foucault?
Well, not any longer.
Well, he did have some kind of some of his talk about power structures were kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But
I think they're valuable in describing the world now, bereft of Platonism.
Right. I mean, Nietzsche hated Plato. Well, I mean, yeah. I don't think he did. I don't think he really did. I think he used that as a kind of way to be dramatic, as a bouncing board to like go off and say, but he's where it all went wrong. I mean, it's hard. Anybody who easily criticizes or dismisses the likes of Plato just really, I mean, Nietzsche of all people could maybe get away with it, obviously, because he was just so brilliant as well. But I don't think I mean, a lot of the idea of being a philosopher and totally discounting Plato is just crazy, first of all.
Yeah.
But I understand what he meant and where he wanted to go with what he was thinking. He used that as a what's the word, springboard.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of powerful, contradictory, crazy thing. But I wouldn't say he wouldn't be like totally disrespectful and think Plato was, terrible or foolish, or he just had this he's just Nietzsche. Foucault, I haven't actually read. I've just read like parts of it. I've read some of the things. I mean, I've read some things that were just, extraordinarily narcissistic and stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things on modern power structures, which were interesting and possibly somewhat true, but Odes of Horace stuff. I like Horace a lot too, actually. Horace was pretty amazing. I don't know if you've read. There's a good translations of it. I have a good translation of his Odes that is from the 19th century that is not overly done. Or sorry, maybe it's from like early 20th century. But it's really good. And it's actually there's a great, I forget which one. There's a great one that it's really brought it home to me, this idea, like I was saying earlier, about the names for the gods being interpretive somewhat, or it all being relative to a certain degree. It's a poem about, he's basically conducting whatever they would call a mass then, but it's like to Zeus. It was so similar to like a Catholic mass, the way it was described. Like we're here, gathered here to do this and that. It was like so similar. It was before the altar, and there was it was just, and this is directly a poem of Horace's, whichever one it was. I just really brought it home to me that it was like that even a modern Catholic mass is, apart from all the talk of Jesus and Israel and all the rest of it, you just you switch the names and the places, and it's the ritual itself is a carryover in many ways. So I don't know. To me, that opened the door to me for being more openly Hellenistic and just thinking, well, the older tradition is to do the same thing, but to not talk about Jesus
Mm-hmm.
and this other stuff. And I don't know. Yeah, I remember that about Horace, but I'm sorry, I'm totally digressing. Whatever else. What's your opinion of Nietzsche now?
I'm not very keen on Nietzsche any longer.
Really?
Yeah.
You totally. I still have big respect for him, I must say.
Yeah.
But tell me why.
I can appreciate him for his contribution to philosophy in the modern era. But no, I'm more a convinced Platonist than a Nietzschean.
Is it because of his stance towards Plato that you are against him now?
I mean, not just because of that, but
right.
I feel Plato presents a more complete picture of reality than Nietzsche.
Yeah, see, that would be another example for me, like Aristotle, though, where I really don't feel like Nietzsche is against him tremendously. And in fact, it's more his rejection of Christianity really puts him more in with older thinkers, and I just think of it as somebody else who went in his own direction, which is fine, which is great, which is obviously what the gods or powers in the world want, which is us to be of such incredible ferocity in our own autistic opinion as to be impactful and leave a trail of fire behind us, if you can. So I don't agree with everything he said. I never agree 100% with anybody anyway. Even Plato, there's a couple of things like that I'd be like, I'm not so sure with it. Very few though. And I feel like almost blasphemous saying that. But yeah. So yeah, I mean, I suppose we digressed a lot from Thomas Taylor, but I mean, there's only so much we can say about him. Apparently, he didn't have so much, as you said, writing of his own. Really.
Yeah, he didn't divulge much about his own personal life, or religious beliefs and such.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for us.
Yeah. It's too bad. But so it was his part. But like, say, a lot of the modern translations don't refer to him at all. Obviously, they just go directly to the source. And I would recommend to people not to not to, as we were saying before. I mean, you would recommend people to read Thomas Taylor over modern translation, would you? Would you say that?
Not necessarily. I wouldn't read Taylor so much for the translations as for his commentaries. Because again, he's reading these texts as a Platonist and according to the Platonic tradition. So he's really insightful for those of us who see Platonism as normative and relevant and as a living wisdom tradition and not just some antiquarian or academic interest.
Right. So his commentaries where he's exactly. Antiquarian. Yeah, exactly. That he was a popularizer of that idea, you would say.
I think so. Yeah.
And that is important, yeah. And that is really a hurdle to get over, and that is true, yeah. Most people that do read it or would read now, even still, would be like, okay, this is something that has no relevance today.
Yeah,
it's like So he's one of the first to look at it that way, I guess. So he made comments on his translations. Is that what you're saying? There was like a commentary in the book itself, like
what is his introductions to these texts? He usually introduces translations with a brief synopsis of the text and then try to relate it and contextualize it to other texts in the Platonic tradition.
Right. So that's where you really got influenced by his personal character and his introductions to the text. Mm-hmm. Well, I must read some of those then, because that would probably be interesting. I'd like to do that. And is there another translator that you are a big fan of, like more recent even, or that you know
about? I mean, it depends on the text. I mean, for his Elements of Theology, E.R. Dodds is pretty good.
Right.
But for his Platonic theology, for example, Proclus' Platonic theology, I believe Taylor's is still the only English translation there is. I don't think anyone else has undertaken to translate it.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? I didn't know that.
I believe so. Yeah.
I never imagined. Really? You should do one. You've got to learn and do your own then.
Oh, God.
We need a modern translation, because there could be words like in the Balboa one that just totally changed something he got wrong. Jesus, that's just lazy. God, no one's done that.
Yeah, I've searched for other English translations of the Platonic theology and I haven't been able to find any. It seems like Taylor's is the only one.
Oh, I did not know that. Well, yeah, this is obviously your destiny.
We'll see about that.
Are you studying Greek, or you said you were, but are you?
Yeah, it's mostly in an amateur way, though. I'm not taking any academic courses to study Greek.
Right. See, like myself, I get more like broadly, I get influenced by things that I think, I follow my daemon, my instinct, and if I see things that I believe are true, I sort of absorb them and I say, okay, that's something that seems to me like someone's not lying to me or bullshitting to me. Mm-hmm. So I can go in different directions and absorb things, and I don't think syncretically, or like I said, but I don't take everything super literally necessarily. I get the overall idea of it and I work with that. So I get the feeling you're more of a guy who does take it quite literally when you're involved in it. And you would, like, so when you say you've taken up Plato and you've left Nietzsche behind, mm-hmm. you really are like all systems go on Plato. And well, like, is that would you say that's true?
More or less, yeah. I mean, I feel myself consumed by Plato and the Platonic tradition, and there's just so much out there my bandwidth is a bit limited. I feel, I really need to understand this tradition, I really need to immerse myself in it and understand as much as possible.
Well, it needs its own advocates. It needs its own priesthood. It deserves it. And it is one of the best of them all. And there's no doubt, because it is the only one that I've seen that not only has the mysticism, but they rationalize. I've never seen mysticism rationalized like this in any other. I mean, maybe I'm missing something. I mean, I haven't read everything in the world, but I haven't seen the reason applied and reason held as the ultimate virtue. You know, it was when I read Plato and I was very influenced by it, but it was later when I read Platonist that I was really kind of like, I guess, converted to whatever it is. That isn't, at least that it's important, and it does. If it needs us to be its priesthood, then if there's nobody else doing it, or I mean, there's a good few people doing it, but to be really kind of advocate for it as real and as a, not just, as you said, how did you put it? Sort of an antiquated belief that is semi-relevant, but a religious kind of document that is, as important, if not more important than any other, considering even almost all the others say they took great influence from it and just like took what they want out of it, conveniently took what they liked and made it their own and pretended that they came up with it, I guess, more or less. But that's not the case. I always have great respect for the origin of things. This is why even though I'm not Greek, I used to talk to a Greek historian about the stuff, and she was like, you should follow the traditions of where you're from. Like me, I'm sort of Irish and English. If you want to look to the older religious traditions and the myths, you should follow that and get into it. And I am into that, and I do sort of follow that as well. But it's like you may, like, she was Greek, so it was convenient for her to see it as that way, as in like, this is mine. But nowhere else can you find things. When I first read these works, you knew you were reading something profoundly creative and true and insightful. The powers of observation are beyond anything I've seen anywhere else, that are also an attempt at being honest. It's not just like believe this or else kind of thing. It's just like frank observation and talk of I've always had respect for the origin of things and pure creativity when I see it. And so like, there's so much that came out of Greece in that period, even though I'm not Greek, even though, and neither are you, I don't think. Obviously your name's Thomas James, you're not Greek. So it's part of our tradition anyways, as it influenced and became a part of the tradition for everybody. But you have to show respect to the likes of Plato or Plotinus, or people that could think about things and observe the world so naively and frankly and intellectually that they could create something so original and impactful that it definitely deserves the status of prophet. And I have to respect it and revere it, and it deserves more than, like you said, as a antiquated, interesting thing. It's, because you read, like, are you Christian, or were you Christian?
No, I
wasn't raised with that
at all.
You were never raised with any of that. Your parents were atheists or something, right?
I wouldn't say atheists, but they just weren't Christian.
Right. What were they then?
What's that?
What? So they were. Did they have another belief? Were you raised? So you weren't raised with any religion of any kind?
No. I mean, my parents, they believed in God, but in a really diffuse and nondescript sense.
Sort of a new age hippie way, was it? Like, sort of?
You could say that.
Right. So you came at this, and you never, so would you have called yourself atheist before? Or what would you, when you were younger?
I did identify as agnostic before.
Agnostic, right. Yeah. So you were, you could see that it was something you can't really, which is, the truest and cleverest way to label yourself, really. When you don't have the a tradition that speaks to you, I guess, or that in your case, no tradition at all. If they were just kind of like, whatever,
right.
Which is very modern. I mean, most of us are kind of more or less the same. But what was my point in asking that? Should have, once again, I forget what the fuck I'm talking about. So you, okay, let me say this. So when you got into heading towards being like, you would call yourself a pagan now, would you?
I don't use that term, but for convenience, we can say that, yeah.
Right. And was it hard for you to officially slide into that as thinking of yourself that way? Or was it?
I wouldn't say hard, but it was a gradual process. The more I read a lot of the Platonic texts, the more convinced I became that there is something more, that material reality, sensible reality is just the initial reality, and that there is, it culminates in a first principle.
And which of the Platonic texts was the most influential, do you think?
I don't think there was one. It was a gradual process of taking in each of them.
Right.
Each
And
one
you,
contributed.
right. And so when you, at the period when you were reading Foucault and such, were you more atheistic then, or?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't religious at that time.
Right. So, and it was probably a typical youthful
Indiscriminate.
useful stage. Yeah. Right. So that's interesting. Yeah. So, and you're committed to it now, anyways. I mean, you and some of those other guys seem pretty like you're committed to it and quite literal about it. And you're happy to argue with people online and say, argue the points of it.
Well, I'm the less argumentative among the bunch, but yeah, for me, it's Platonism is normative, it's relevant, and it's a practice. It's not just armchair theorizing. It's really internalizing it as a way of life.
Well, the practice is a little bit separate, though. You have to admit, you can, because it has been applied to different religions, and the practice is, religiously speaking, you have to get into a bit of sort of paganism to practice it as they would have, anyways, right? And even like he doesn't talk about much, what to do in a ritual or anything like that. Like there's nothing.
Right, nothing of that survives.
No. That's pretty long. I mean, we covered a lot of things there. I think that's pretty good. Introduction, more to you and your thought than Thomas. But I mean, we talked about him as much as we can, I guess. I don't, as seeing as I never read him, and he's just a translator and didn't write his own book or anything.
But hopefully this, spurns interest.
People should know about him and have some respect for him because he was a man of influence and he did a lot of good work in the end. So I guess that's that. We've done it. Thomas Taylor and various other things for you to learn about.
Absolutely.
And thanks, Thomas.
All right, thanks for having me.
And no problem. I'll be talking to you later. And that's it.
All right, thank you.
See you later. Okay, bye-bye.